Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, July 3rd. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 271 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. We're now streaming simultaneously on YouTube, Twitter, also known as X, Facebook, and Twitch. And just a reminder, Tamara has recorded a tutorial for turning on live captioning during this live stream, which you can find a link to in the description below. Coming up, we'll have a discussion with our contributor Abubaker Abed live from Gaza, and later on Shir Hever will join us to talk about significant developments in terms of further disintegration of the Israeli economy, governing structures, and society. We'll also be joined by novelist Ahmed Masoud, who's going to talk about his family in Gaza, and Jon Elmer will cover all the latest news and videos from the resistance, focusing on the battle in 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 and the ongoing defense of Rafah. But first, some of the news from Gaza between June 27th and July 3rd. Israeli forces launched yet another invasion and attack on the 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 neighborhood of Gaza City last Thursday and continuing into this week, blowing up entire buildings and residential blocks. Louise Wateridge, the senior communications officer for UNRWA, the United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees, described the amount of destruction in 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 and the surrounding areas as, quote, apocalyptic. She added that, quote, most people have lost their homes either completely or partially and have to flee with very few belongings, essentially what they can carry in their hands. Many people have lost members of their families. The UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs estimates that up to 84,000 people have been displaced from 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 over a matter of just a few days. Al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, have been confronting the Israeli occupation forces in pitched battles to defend 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿. And of course, we'll have more on the Battle of 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 with Jon later on in the program. Israeli forces have also attacked Jabalia in the north, as well as areas in the central and southern parts of the Gaza Strip this week, including in Burej refugee camp, where people displaced from Rafah in the south have tried to find shelter. At least 4 Palestinians were killed in a home in Burej on Saturday, and at least 15 were killed in attacks over the weekend in Rafah. At the same time, Israeli forces accelerated its attacks on Al-Mawasi, the sand dunes to the west of Rafah, where displaced Palestinians have set up tents and where Israeli forces have targeted those tents in recent months. On Saturday, Israel carpet-bombed and shelled tents in Al-Mawasi. A survivor of the massacre told Al Jazeera, quote, we all ran for our lives, leaving everything behind. All of a sudden, the Israeli tanks invaded the area, coupled with helicopter and drone attacks. I saw bodies in pieces and flesh all over the place. On Monday, the Israeli army ordered the entire area of eastern Khan Yunis to evacuate and declared that 250,000 people under the evacuation orders should head to Al-Mawasi. The Associated Press reported 12 people were killed in an airstrike in Deir al-Balah, including 9 members of the multi-generational Hamdan family who had fled their home on Monday night after the Israeli military ordered the evacuation of Khan Yunis. The Associated Press reported yesterday, quote, they found refuge with extended relatives in a building further north inside an Israeli-declared safe zone. But hours after they arrived, an Israeli airstrike on Tuesday afternoon hit the building in the town of Deir al-Balah, killing 9 members of the family and 3 others. In Khan Yunis, doctors and staff at the Gaza European Hospital began relocating patients in preparation for Israeli attacks on the medical facility. Medical sources told the Turkish Anadolu news agency that the hospital's technical teams also moved some medical devices and equipment out of fear that it would be damaged if the Israeli army raided the hospital. The spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Gaza told the Associated Press that some families dragged patients in their hospital beds through the streets for up to 10 kilometers or 6 miles to reach safety. Dr. Mohammed of the European Hospital recorded this video on Monday night.
Hi guys. So as you can see all behind me, the European hospital is about to be evacuated but everyone is leaving now. Many of the doctors have left. Many of the patients, they've left. As you can just see behind me, it's just chaos and mayhem. Myself and 4 other doctors, we the only remain doctors. I've decided to stay until the end, as long as there are people around. Myself and the others, we are not leaving. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but we will be on a standby, and we'll deal with it when it comes. Wish me good luck.
That was Dr. Mohammed of the Gaza European Hospital. 𝐄𝐥𝐿, the bureaucratic arm of Israel's army, denied that the military ordered the evacuation of the hospital. Colonel Elad Goren of 𝐄𝐥𝐿 told reporters, quote, "It's safe for them." The Gaza European Hospital was one of the last hospitals barely operating in the southern Gaza Strip after the Rafah Hospital and Nasser hospitals were forced out of service due to serial and systematic Israeli attacks and lack of basic medicine, medical equipment, clean water, and other essential supplies. The Palestine Red Crescent Society announced on Monday that their headquarters at the recently somewhat reopened Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis, quote, "is now overcrowded with injuries following the Israeli occupation's warning to evacuate the Al-Fukhari area where the European Gaza Hospital is located." Ambulance crews transported the injured from Nasser Hospital after it also became overcrowded due to the transfer of patients from the European Gaza Hospital. Over the weekend, the Medical Association said it was forced to stop services in Al-Mawasi due to Israeli tank shelling and falling debris, which threatened their medical staff. The attacks on physicians and their families continue. Dr. Hassan Hamdan, head of the burns and plastic surgery department at Nasser Hospital, was reported killed on Tuesday along with his entire family in an Israeli airstrike on their house in Deir Balah in the central area of Gaza. Meanwhile, Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, the director of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, was returned after being arrested while attempting to evacuate southern Gaza in November. He was detained inside Nafha prison, an Israeli concentration camp, for 7 months, held without charge. Our colleague Maureen Claire Murphy reported that Abu Salmiya was released on Monday along with about 50 other Palestinian detainees. Abu Salmiya said that he was brought before a judge several times, quote, "and even there they presented no evidence." He said, quote, "Israel arrested me as if they had caught a big fish. Now it turns out that everything was a lie and an illusion, and they inflated the whole affair." The hospital director said that, quote, "prisoners face physical abuse and mental abuse daily, and that some detainees died during interrogation." Maureen writes that, quote, "in December, following the Israeli military's invasion and capture of Al-Shifa Hospital, independent UN human rights experts accused Israel of waging an unrelenting war on Gaza's health system. Israeli forces withdrew from Al-Shifa Hospital in April, leaving it in ruins. In advance of its attack, Israel had claimed that there was a vast underground complex run by Palestinian fighters under Al-Shifa Hospital. It even produced an elaborate animation of the supposed multi-level command center it claimed was the, quote, "main headquarters for Hamas terrorist activity." After the siege on Al-Shifa went unchallenged by its powerful allies, Israel didn't bother with such labored pretext to justify its subsequent attacks on most of Gaza's remaining hospitals, perpetrating them in the open, Maureen reports. After his release to Gaza, Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya vowed to return to work and rebuild Al-Shifa Hospital, quote, "as it was before and even better. This hospital will be a beacon of healthcare for all our community in Palestine and the Gaza Strip," he said. The Geneva-based Euromed Human Rights Monitor said that the doctor's release without charge, quote, "proves beyond a reasonable doubt that the Israeli military's pretext for raiding and destroying Al-Shifa Hospital was entirely baseless and fabricated." Israeli political figures and government officials admonished the domestic spy agency, the Shin Bet, for releasing Abu Salmiya. The agency said that the doctor had met, quote, all criteria regarding the perceived level of danger compared to other prisoners, but said that his release, quote, will undergo investigation. The release of such a high-profile individual would likely not have occurred without the approval of the Shin Bet, an indication that it had found no pretext to continue detaining him, Maureen reports. Along with other extremist ministers, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir demanded the ousting of the Shin Bet's director. In response to the outcry by Israeli public officials over the release of Abu Salmiya, the Shin Bet said that it had been forced to send prisoners back to the Gaza Strip due to a lack of space in Israeli jails, according to the Times of Israel. For much more on the release of Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, the attacks on healthcare workers, and the situation for prisoners inside Israeli jails, read Maureen Claire Murphy's report, Gaza Hospital Director's Release Exposes Israeli Torture, on electronicintifada.net. And finally, we wanted to bring you some images and videos from journalists and others in Gaza who are not just relentlessly documenting the unspeakable atrocities, but also making sure to highlight the resilience, joy, and determination of the Palestinian people. This week, the Instagram account Translating Palestine posted this video of a man in a camp for displaced people. He explains his method for filling large barrels of water without any electricity to pump it and without needing to carry heavy buckets to the top of the water container or disturb his neighbors. I'll summarize what he's saying. He explains how he created this simple but effective system. By lifting a wooden handle attached to a bucket of water, the water empties into the tall barrel. Translating Palestine says that this innovative approach maintains privacy and simplifies the arduous task of water transportation in the camp, especially as water is incredibly scarce and the regular method, using an electrical pump, is not a possibility. Here's that video.
احنا هذه الفكرة جت بناء على زي ما بيقولوها الحاجة أم الاختراع، فإحنا كانت الفكرة هذه إنه إحنا بدنا نطلع مية على البرميل، لا في كهرب ولا في مية تطلع عنا من فوق. المية اللي بنقلها طبعا بالجرادل أو بالقلان الصفر هذولا بننقلها نقل، فبدنا نطلعها فوق. فإحنا عشان تطلعها فوق بدك سيب وبدك واحد يطلع فوق وواحد ينزل تحت، ويا ساتر والجيران وكلها، ما أنت عارف إحنا في مخيمات وخيام، ولما بتطلع هيك بس تطلع راسك فوق بتشوف جارك، فصعب الأمور إنك تطلع فوق على البرميل عشان المية. فأجت الفكرة هذه إنه أنا أرفع المية بدون كهرب وبدون ما أقول يا ساتر وبدون ما أطلع ولا أطلع على جاري. فكانت الفكرة إنه جبنا القلن هذا اللي هو قلن المية، فتحته من هان وشبكته طبعا بخشبة برزة فوق ورزة تحت هان، وفي بربيش طبعا اللي هو من القلن بدير فوق، فبدير المية هان، وبالطريقة هذه بنمسك الخشبة هذه بنرفعها فوق بتصير المية أعلى من البرميل، فبتنزل في قلب البرميل وبننزل ثاني بكل سهولة وبساطة، وما بدون ما تشوف جارك ولا جارك يشوفك ولا.
And Aboud Betah, a teenager in Gaza who has been regularly posting videos on his social media account documenting the genocide from his point of view, talked about resilience in Gaza. I'll let the video play and then read the translation for accessibility.
إخوتي وأخواتي الكرام، عدنا لكم من جديد، معكم عبود. تعرفوا يا أخوان، إحنا في غزة بنحاول نضلنا عايشين مع إنه فيش أي سبب بخليك تتمسك في الحياة. بنحاول ننشر الفرحة مع إنه فيش أي شيء مفرح في وسط الخوف والرعب. بنحاول نعيش على أمل مع إنه فيش أي هدف بخليك تسعى عشانه. بنحاول نكسر روتين الحياة، بس كل شيء صعب إن نتعايش بهيك واقع. وإحنا عارفين إنه كل هذا عشان نوصل لمرحلة الانكسار والخضوع، بس فشل. حنضلنا ندافع ونقاوم لأجل البقاء على هذه الأرض، ورح نكتب عن كل معاناة رواية عنوانها الصمود، ورح نرسم لكل مشهد محزن لوحة عنوانها الصبر والثبات. ورح نضلنا نقاوم لأجل ما يعترف فينا هذا العالم الظالم بأحقيتنا وبأحقية وجودنا على هذه الأرض كأي إنسان على هذا الكوكب الظالم اللي ما عمروش شاف حرب زي هالحرب ولا عمره عاش أصلا. وبس والله، السلام عليكم.
And here's the translation of Aboud saying, "Dear brothers and sisters, we are back again. I'm Aboud. You know my brothers. We in Gaza are trying to stay alive despite having no reason to hold onto life. We are trying to spread joy even though nothing is joyful amid the fear and terror. We try to live with hope despite no goal to chase. We try to break the monotony of life, but everything is difficult and it's hard to cope with such a reality. We know that all of this is happening All of this happening is intended to break us, but they have failed. We continue to defend and resist to remain on this land. We will write about every suffering a novel titled with resilience. We will draw every sad scene a painting titled with steadfastness and resilience. We will continue to resist and resist until this unjust world recognizes our rights and our right to exist on this land like any other human being on this oppressive planet that has never seen war like this one. That's it. Peace be upon you. And finally, in Dallas, Texas, hundreds of supporters came out to welcome Adam, an 8-year-old boy and his mother from Gaza. Adam survived multiple displacements and an Israeli drone attack on his home, but lost his leg. He will be receiving medical treatment and will be fitted for a prosthetic limb. Steve Sosaby, the director of Heal Palestine, the medical aid organization that is helping Adam and other children obtain medical treatment abroad, posted this video of Adam's welcoming committee this past week. And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our phenomenal writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali. Oh, you're muted.
Hi, Nora.
There you go.
Thank you for that roundup. So much, especially the release of Mohammed Abu Salmiya, his release after 6 months,
7
months in detention, and then hearing the horrific stories of the torture he personally experienced and witnessed is just unbelievable.
Yeah. And there's so much more. I mean, he delivered a press conference talking about exactly what he witnessed and experienced, and also talked about the attacks specifically on physicians and medical facilities. And our colleague Maureen Claire Murphy wrote about it and much more. So I'm encouraging people to go and read her report on that, which is right now up on the Electronic Intifada. But coming up, we'll have discussions with Shir Hever and Ahmed Masoud. But first, we're honored to have our contributor Abubaker Abed with us live from Central Gaza. Abubaker. Let's see. I know the connection has been difficult the last few days. Hi, Abubaker.
Hello.
So glad you're here.
Hi, Abubaker. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you so much. Also, always nice to talk to you.
Tell us about the current situation right now.
We can.
Can you hear us? There might be a delay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's breaking. It's breaking quite a bit, but I don't. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
We can hear you clearly.
If you can talk about what's happening in Deir Bala, where you are, tell us about the situation for people there.
So, yes, one of the first important things that I want to say is that we've been talking about it over the course of the last weeks, which is that summer is lethal. Unfortunately, people in tents cannot bear this life because you're talking about lizards and snakes and other insects spreading all over in tents, which is something which causes many viral infections, including scabies, for hepatitis virus A and other viruses, and that even sometimes people had their livers completely damaged and dysfunction. So yes, this situation right now for people in tents is absolutely unendurable, and that they don't have any options. The temperatures range from 30 to 37, and during the noon and after the noon it's very scorching. But you can see people outside. They are queuing up for water for hours under this scorching sun for just a gallon of water. You can see clearly that children under the age of 10, they wait and they queue up for hours to get a gallon of water, probably less than 3 liters. So I think that even women, they queue up for water. If we talk about it, this is not the life of children that should be. This is not the life of women that should be. Absolutely. And at the same time, unfortunately, attacks on Deir al-Balah continue, particularly in the eastern outskirts of Deir al-Balah. We know and we've seen that from high-rise buildings that the Israeli forces have seized full control of Salah ad-Din Street after heavily attacking that street in the eastern outskirts of Deir al-Balah. We've also been aware that many residential blocks and the municipality wells and all of their agricultural lands across the territory in Deir al-Balah, particularly in the eastern outskirts, have been bulldozed by Israeli tanks. So we can see that also we can clearly see from high-rise buildings Apache warplanes shooting at civilians at the same time, which is absolutely frightening. And also different attacks have hit different homes in residential buildings in the west and the south. So, and also in the north, particularly in the Zawaida area, we've also been aware that one of the doctors has been killed with his family, with 8 members of his family in an attack in Deir al-Balah some days ago. So yes, the situation continues to be struggling, continues to be very challenging. And unfortunately, yes, only 4 days, we're getting into the 10th month. Absolutely unimaginable, absolutely unbearable. People hope, pray, and that pray that the negotiations, they have been hearing the news that the negotiations will be resumed, but this kind of protracted negotiations does not give those people hope. It does not give them any means of life that this will end. They're praying every time, every day that this will end because they've bled enough. Their wounds haven't been healed, healed up. They have been bleeding across all those days over the last 271 days. And yes, personally speaking, because that is something that I wanted to say, because it's not a personal life, and even that I'm a journalist, I also lived through all these harsh circumstances. Unfortunately, my sister has been, you know, has been crying over her pain. She cannot find the right medications. She's also in an environment that is not better for her health and for her baby's health. So she's been crying over that. She's been crying and praying that this will end. And she continues to suffer from unbearable, and she continues to bear the brunt of the suffering. And yes, this is life. And the same thing for my father. So my father and mother both are still sick. They lack medications. My father's feet are bleeding most of the time. And this is the whole situation. It's not all my family, but every family around. The inaccessibility to water, food continues to be the main struggle. Continues that also we have the prices. They have been skyrocketing over the course of time. The flow of goods hasn't been consistent, which makes for a lot of problems for people here. And yes, there's still a lot, and more people are being killed, more people are bleeding. We are slowly dying, unfortunately, and we hope that this will end.
Abubaker, it's so much to take in. We're so happy to see you. And we would normally want to say, and we do say, congratulations to your sister on her giving birth, but under the circumstances for her and for so many new mothers and newborn babies in Gaza, we know that it's a struggle between life and death just to survive. But we just want to extend our congratulations to your sister, and we pray for you and your family and for your new nephew,
Exactly.
that he and all the children of Gaza will see a much better life very, very soon. They don't deserve anything less than that. Abubaker, I want to ask you something else. It's very hard to ask about this in the midst of so much horror and suffering, but as many people know, you are an avid sports fan, a sports expert, and a sports journalist. And
Yes.
even during this genocide, you have been watching the football tournaments, the European football tournament. And I don't know if you also follow Copa America. Believe it or not, I watched the Mexico-Ecuador match the other day. It's something that will shock many of my friends. But and you've been sharing that you're watching it. I just want to ask you about what that means to you right now in the middle of this genocide. What does it provide some sort of relief and distraction?
Great question. Incredibly crafted question, because this is a very, very interesting point to bring up. So yes, it brings a lot of relief, a lot of distraction and respite from Israel's continuous bombardment, because as I'm telling you, as being a football journalist, a sports journalist and commentator of the course of the last years, yes, I always do. And even that, probably it's something private, but it's okay. Being a Sports English has sent me a high message from their studio, which really, really made my day. So when you look at people and how they are trying to cope, because I've been asked numerous times, how are you coping with the current situation? How can I cope? Because we find solace in football. We find solace in watching the tournament, and we find solace in finding or in teams that support the genocide losing and being humiliated on the pitch. And I hope that every team that supported the genocide will be kicked out of the tournament, and I'm sure that will do. And you can see that about the teams and about everyone, that look at the journey we are trying to follow. Just watch the highlights of the game, and sometimes some of the game we charge the batteries from the early morning for hours. We wait for hours to charge our batteries. You're talking about 5 hours at least. Then you set the scene, you set the screen, you set the TV screen and other stuff in the night. You need at least 2 hours. And then attacks happen around you. So you try to lower the voice with the sound of the TV screen as much as you can, because you're afraid of something happening around. And then you cannot watch much of the game because the battery will be will be running out very soon, because you didn't have the means to watch a game. But we're still following the score lines. We're still watching those players. We thank the teams and the fans bases that have been supporting Palestine, such as Turkey. Turkey knocked out Austria 2-1 in the round of 16, and their fans have been raising the Palestinian flag. Also, Spain did the same thing. That is one of the most predominant forms of support for Palestine, because football is a place where your voice can be heard very, very widely. And yes, that is something we want. It is not about only a kind of double standards that Ukraine was showing extremely great support and unrivaled support, but then Palestine hasn't seen anything. We're talking about more than 323 athletes have been killed in Gaza, including 231 footballers. Of those footballers, more than 66 children. That is absolutely unbearable. We're talking about that after the Rafah invasion, there is an update that only 4 sporting facilities have been undamaged across the territory. We're talking about that at least more than 1,000 footballers and sportsmen and women have been severely wounded from Israel's relentless bombardment. Unfortunately, they haven't kicked the ball since October the 7th. We still find solace in football. We still see football as a means of life. But you mentioned something very important, Dr. Ali, that you are a sports journalist. But make sure that everybody knows that I'm the oldest sports journalist across Palestine. And despite this fact, I was attacked by right-wing papers, not supported, and you already know the story, and let it not be a secret. No, the Telegraph, the Times, The Guardian and other right-wing papers, they have attacked me instead of supporting and having my back amid this genocide, and I have no reason why. But yes, this is their double standards. I really have no idea why this is happening, because this is a quiet tragedy that people haven't been talked about, and we need people to understand and to know that everything is going to be okay. We love football, we love life, football means to us life, and we continue to have this spirit now, every time, and forever. So yes, it's about this, that football means to us life, and we will continue to seek some respite and love life despite the truly unbearable circumstances.
Yeah. Well, Abubaker, we just have a minute left, and I wanted to highlight your story that we just training at a time of massive shock. In just 30 seconds or so, tell us about covering this story and what was significant to you.
It was significant because there was no means of a good environment or good conducive environment to learning amid such circumstances. These medical students are somehow obliged to go and continue their learning because of the continuous targeting of medical staff across the territory. Many have been killed. Healthcare professionals have been killed also. So they're trying to train those students to get into to service, do what they can, because of the continuous targeting of these staff. Despite of this staff, and despite all the circumstances, they try and be helpful, be there for their people, and they are absolutely bright, shining students. I'm very sure they have all this.
Yeah. Well, it's a really important story, very moving, as always. All of your reporting has been just exceptional, especially under the circumstances, Abubaker. We want to again extend our congratulations to your sister and to your family, and I know that everybody who's watching and listening to this wants to extend a bubble of protection around all of you, and we all hope that this is over immediately. But
we hope so. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Abubaker, we love you, and we can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Please be safe. Bye. And you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah. So glad we could get Abubaker on, Ali. That was essential.
It always brings, he has such an upbeat personality that you can almost miss the sheer horror of what people are living through, but it just always lifts my spirits to talk to him.
Yeah. And his sports commentary on his Twitter, for example, it's relentless and remarkable, and he's so funny and so precise. I can't wait for the day when he can go back to covering sports.
Yeah, such a talent. It's something he loves and something he knows, and I wish we lived in a world where that's what he could focus on.
Yeah.
Hope we will soon.
Exactly. It's coming soon. Well, we're going to turn now to our contributor and frequent guest, Shir Hever. Let's see if I can there we go. Shir joined us about a month ago for an episode of the Standalone podcast to talk about Israel's internal collapse, but we wanted to bring him back on today to talk about the significant developments in terms of the further disintegration of the Israeli economy as its genocide and war of attrition drags on. Shir, thank you so much for coming back with us today.
Thanks for having me. Even though it's not easy to follow Abubaker, it was really a heartbreaking interview, but a very important one.
Yeah, indeed. Well, there's a lot to cover. Let's start by talking about the giant microchip maker Intel announcing that it's halting plans for a $25 billion chip making plant in Kiryat Gat, even though Intel said in a statement earlier this month that it is, quote, fully committed to the region. It pointed to adapting to so-called changing timelines and that, quote, our decisions are based on business conditions, market dynamics, and responsible capital management. Can you make sense of this boilerplate tech speak and what it means in terms of Israel's tech industry collapsing?
Yeah, well, this text that they published is a big bunch of nothing, of course, but I think that is part of the story. The Intel deciding to cancel their biggest investment in the Israeli economy ever is probably the biggest victory of BDS in history. We've done a lot of research about Intel, which is such an important pillar of the Israeli economy and so complicit in the system of oppression, and found not only that Intel has reported that more than 7% of their employees in Israel are reservists who are actually not showing up to work because they are going into Gaza and killing people, but also we found that the chip that Intel is producing is embedded into an Elbit Systems weapon, which is sold as a enhancer of the lethality of infantry. Something that the Dutch military is buying a lot of this, and the Dutch army has been complaining that the system isn't working, and which is not surprising considering the fact that Elbit Systems has never tested their weapons against the conventional army, but only in the course of oppressing Palestinians and killing civilians. So Intel, with these discoveries, Intel was in a very difficult situation, and any kind of investment in a state which is in rapid collapse, economically, socially, politically, ostracized by the whole world. This is just irresponsible from a very corporate capitalistic point of view of Intel's responsibility to its own investors. So they made the statement that they're going to cancel the investment of the $25 billion that Israel was desperately hoping to see as an inflow of foreign currency, and when all other investments have dried up. And then there was a statement which was covered in all the Israeli newspapers saying that this is not a cancellation of the investment. It is actually only just postponing it. It's because of technical issues. It's because of the Turkish sanctions on dual-use items, which makes it difficult for the subcontractors that Intel has hired to build the factory. They don't get the materials. The only problem with these statements, none of them come from Intel. They only came from the Israeli government, who was making excuses for Intel, because the alternative would be to acknowledge the fact that the Israeli economy is simply not working, and they cannot make that statement. So from Intel, the only thing we hear is this silence, which is silence with a lot of words that you've just read out to us. But they're not saying anything really. I think this would explain also why the share price of Intel has plummeted, because investors don't understand what's going on. They see the company canceling the investment and not explaining anything about it. But I think we can understand what's really happening, which is actually that Intel made a sound financial decision. They are not going to invest in Israel.
Well, that's definitely good news, and we hope that it's something that many other companies will follow suit on. Another major industry, of course, Israel advertises itself as a high-tech haven, even though that is now collapsing. But also the arms industry. According to recently released figures, 2023 was a record year for Israel's arms exports. But of course, most of that was before the events of October 7th. I'm going to get your opinion on that. But first, let's take a look at a couple of recent videos. The first one here shows Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistance organization, shooting down an Israeli Hermes drone. Let's take a look at that. And that we're watching, for those who are listening, a viewfinder of a missile, and it's we see the drone in the distance. It's a black and white image, and boom, the drone tumbles out of the sky. So that's the first video I want to show. The second one, again, it's just another brief clip that we can go to now, is Hezbollah forces attacking and apparently destroying an Iron Dome missile battery. Let's take a look at that. And again, we're seeing these this is a clip released by Hezbollah. Jon Elmer showed us these in a recent episode, and then this is basically the footage again supplied by Hezbollah, them showing one of their drones attacking the Iron Dome battery and severely damaging or destroying it. And Shir, the reason I wanted to show those particular clips is because both the Hermes drone and Iron Dome are sort of flagships of Israel's arms industry and military exports. Can you talk about what videos like this and Israel's other military failures in the last 9 months mean for Israel's military reputation and arms sales? What do you see going on with Israel's arms industry more generally?
As impressive as these videos may be, I'm not sure that they are what makes a difference, because I think that there are two kinds of customers for the Israeli weapons. There are the customers which are mostly global South countries, especially authoritarian regimes, which are using Israeli weapons to oppress their own people. And the Israeli arms industry has become a source of global harm for the whole world. And then the weapons that have become the trademark of the Israeli arms industry, the Hermes drones are part of it, but not so much the Iron Dome, but also things like spyware, surveillance equipment, and incarceration equipment, facial recognition. So really tools of oppression. And when we're talking about these customers, the sales of the Israeli arms industry have plummeted. And that's very interesting, with the possible exception of Morocco, which is still very much interested in those very technologies which they're using against the Sahrawis, as they see a very close parallel between the occupation of West Sahara and the Israeli occupation of Palestine. But these customers, most of them, because they are from countries which have lived through colonialism, they can see the process of decolonization and the collapse of the Israeli power. And they are just, from a very pragmatic point of view, not a moral point of view, unfortunately, are saying there's no point in signing a contract and buying a weapon that will arrive in a couple of months or years and will require maintenance and support and training from an industry which is at a dead end. One notable exception is India, which is, of course, a country with a long colonial history. India is selling weapons to Israel, but not buying so much. So again, they don't see any reason of signing a contract to buy weapons that may or may not arrive. But they are selling, because why not make a profit right now, even though they don't necessarily think that they'll be able to keep this customer for much longer. And I think it's very good if we also spend a couple of minutes just to talk about the legal aspects and the consequences of that element of the arms industry. But the other customers, I said there are two kinds. The others are the European states which are complicit in supporting the genocide. And those are still buying Israeli weapons even after October 7, even after the genocide has become undeniable. And this is really the point where I would very much like to talk about the legal side of things. But because you mentioned this particular report and these statistics, let's just reflect on the fact that in the Israeli media, they were not able to make that very simple distinction that you made, saying these are numbers from before October 7. So they are presenting it falsely, even in the headlines, as if Israel's war in Gaza is a boost to its arms exports, which is simply false. But a more interesting analysis of this data going up until October 7th is that they're acknowledging that the biggest chunk of weapons that Israel is selling are air defense systems. And then you might say, oh, this is the Iron Dome, but actually that's not the Iron Dome. There is another air defense system that Israel is selling, which is called Arrow 3. And Arrow 3 is a system that is only sold to one country, which is Germany. But because Germany is paying 4 billion euros for the Arrow 3, it has become the biggest item on the export, and it is about more than 30% of the total export for 2023. So without the Arrow 3 contract, the year 2023 would not have been a peak year in Israeli arms exports. Let's just focus on that particular deal, which has been done so terribly. I mean, just from the point of view of the stupidity involved. I've been following questions to the Bundestag, the German parliament, about this deal. And they asked the government, how much are you going to pay for the Arrow 3? And they said, well, we can't give you numbers because that would undermine the negotiation process. But there's no way we can put a budget of more than 3.5 billion euros for this. So the Israelis just read the answers from government and said, okay, so the price is 4 billion. And that's what they got. And just shows the stupidity of the German Ministry of Defense. And a professor in Germany commented that the Arrow 3 system, which is, by the way, completely untested, never used in history, and nobody knows if it works or not. We know that there's Arrow 2, and Arrow 2 fell in Syrian territory. There was a misfire launching of Arrow 2. The Syrian army sent the Arrow 2 missile to Russia to study it and analyze it. So if Germany is buying the Arrow 3 system, one has to ask against whom exactly. and I guess all Germans would immediately tell you, well, in case Russia will send missiles to Germany, well, the one country that knows how to bypass the Arrow 3 system is Russia. And the Arrow 3 system is actually designed to intercept exo-atmospheric missiles. Russia doesn't have any. So in order to somehow defend this very stupid deal, which makes no sense whatsoever, when Houthis fired missiles at Israel, Israel claimed that they used the Arrow system to intercept them. And then if you read the small letters, they actually said, yeah, it was Arrow 2. But it was presented as, we've just tested the system that we're selling to Germany, even though these were not exo-atmospheric missiles. Arrow 3 is still completely untested. If you don't mind, I wanted to say something about the legal issue here, because that's another very important part of the work that the BNC is doing, the Boycott National Committee of the BDS movement, is to try to make legal analysis, like which we get mostly from Al-Aqsa, but also to publish it and to distribute it, because there is a legal obligation of third states in a case of war crimes, and especially in a case of genocide, but not just genocide, that they have a legal obligation not only to stop selling weapons to Israel, but also not to buy weapons from Israel, because they're financing the genocide. They're financing the arms companies which are making the weapons for the Israeli military. And it's also illegal to transit the weapons. So this is very important also for our viewers and listeners to know that when we call for a military embargo, we're just calling on states to enforce, to respect international law. This is illegal. And because the countries that are arming Israel are Western countries, the Western democracies that claim to be the big defenders of international law, we actually have a lot of leverage to launch lawsuits and to stop the weapons.
And is that being prepared at all? Like, especially in terms of, I mean, these possible arrest warrants coming from the International Criminal Court, all the rulings of the International Court of Justice. There are people here in the U.S., for example, who are trying to get the U.S. government to adhere to its own Leahy law, which is the Arms Export Act. Is there any legal recourse that's happening now, and where do you see that going?
It's happening in parallel in many different countries. We've already had some success in the Netherlands, even more success in Belgium. There's a very intensive legal process which has not yet been completed in Britain, so every country where we have this process, where the local lawyers and the local organizations have to launch the lawsuit locally, but it is within a network which is coordinated by the BDS movement. That's where we were able to get precedence, and that's very important, because if we get a victory in one country, it has tremendous impact on other countries. And Germany, which is maybe the last country on earth that will take the right moral stance on genocide. Really, we have to acknowledge this very sad fact. But even the German court has ruled basically against the group of lawyers, mostly Palestinian lawyers in Germany, who filed a lawsuit against the arms exports. But the court couldn't say Germany is allowed to sell weapons to Israel in a time of suspicion of genocide. Even a German court cannot say this. So the court said, we're rejecting the lawsuit based on our understanding that there are no arms export permits. And this is based on a loophole. I don't want to bore you with the shenanigans of the German government and how they hide the weapons that they're selling and how they're lying. It's not that interesting. But it is something that we can expose.
It's shenanigans for sure.
Yeah. They did claim in the International Court of Justice, that's something we can talk about as that case advances, that they announced at the beginning of the genocide very proudly that they had increased tenfold the value of the export licenses. And they said the government itself, the German federal government, bragged about how much weaponry it was sending. But when it came to the International Court of Justice case brought by Nicaragua for Germany's full partnership in this genocide, the Germans claimed all of a sudden, oh no, we're not actually sending that many weapons. And so we can see how they're lying. But let's shift focus for the time we have left. We have just a few minutes left. Yesterday, Shir, the New York Times published a sensational article in which Israel's generals attacked the political leadership of Israel and put forward the view that Israel can't win a military victory against Hamas and there needs to be a ceasefire agreement. It's headlined, Israeli generals low on munitions want a truce in Gaza. And we don't have time to talk about the whole article now, but I just want to draw your attention to a particular passage, which I'm going to read for our listeners. And it says, the war is the most intense conflict that Israel has fought in at least 4 decades, and the longest it has ever fought in Gaza. In an army largely reliant on reservists, some are on their third tour of duty since October and struggling to balance the fighting with their professional and family commitments. It also says that fewer reservists are reporting for duty, according to military officials, and officers are increasingly distrustful of their commanders amid a crisis of confidence in the military leadership, propelled in part by its failure to prevent the Hamas-led attack in October. Can you talk about the ongoing disintegration of Israeli society?
I have a lot to say about this article, and you said we only have a few minutes left, so you're going to have to interrupt me, but I'm fine with that. So
we want to hear what your views are.
Sure. Well, first of all, the interesting response to this article from Netanyahu put me in a very awkward situation where I have to agree with him. I don't like to be in that position, because he said those are the winds of defeat that we're seeing, and I have to agree that these are indeed the winds of defeat. But I do want to say that the New York Times article here is written from a very US-centric perspective, because they put the munitions on the headline, and of course, being so interested in the military embargo, this is my role. Of course, the ammunition interests me a lot, and I'm trying to stop it. But if we address the reality on the ground, what Israel is running out of even more than ammunition is soldiers. And that's something that the New York Times didn't, even in this passage that you highlighted, is only the tip of the iceberg, what's really happening. Because first of all, the Israeli government, they forced these reservists to stay in Gaza and to fight for 8 months straight. This is something that is certainly the colonialist soldiers that see themselves as superior in every way to Palestinians and are allowed to do whatever they want. The fact that they cannot go home after 8 months and they have to keep living in Gaza is something that shatters their whole colonial perspective. And I've read a fascinating article by an Israeli journalist who was embedded with these soldiers. And of course, this journalist is not criticizing the genocide, but the journalist pointed out that every officer in Gaza carries packets of cigarettes in order to tip the soldiers, because there is an economy of cigarettes that has developed among the soldiers in Gaza, as if they're prisoners in a prison. They've developed their sub-economy with cigarettes. Soldiers will not obey orders unless they're paid with cigarettes. Can you imagine a military force that the officers have to tip the soldiers so that they will clean the base? And when I say base, of course, I mean stolen Palestinian homes that they've appropriated, and they sleep in these homes. But they're just not cleaning after themselves, and the officers have to pay them with cigarettes to get them to do this. So this also speaks volumes to the collapse of discipline and the military structure. Now, the government has decided to enact a law, or an executive order, to extend the reserve duty for another year, which means that all the soldiers that are already in their 40s and expected to leave active military duty and be released from the reserve were told, no, you're going to stay for another year, just this year when you're supposed to be released, which the Israeli Supreme Court has shot down this executive order and said, no, you cannot do this. So Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, announced that he's instructed the military to recall 15,000 soldiers who were disqualified from reserve duty back to service. I am so relieved that I'm not there, because I've also been disqualified from service, by pretending to be crazy. I never served in the Israeli military, and like me, there are the majority of Israelis actually who didn't serve in the military. And the idea of taking soldiers who were disqualified because of health problems, or because of a criminal record, or disciplinary problems, to force them to go back into Gaza now is, clearly they're not going to make for good soldiers. And in this context, let's talk about the ultra-Orthodox, because that's where the real interesting story is. And I think that's also a problem, especially with Western media, which focuses on the ultra-Orthodox as if they are a representation of the extremist or fundamentalistic part of Jewish society, which is absolutely not true. It's just that they're dressed in a distinctive way, so they make up for good photo opportunities. But in fact, most of them are anti-Zionists. And they've made a decision to make an alliance with the Zionist parties in Israel against their theology, against their beliefs. And this alliance goes back to the days of Ben Gurion. They would get some autonomy, they would get some money for their yeshivas, and in exchange, they were released from military service. Ben Gurion just wanted to have a Jewish majority at all costs, and so he wanted these ultra-Orthodox to be part of the Zionist project. But they haven't become Zionists as a result. And now the soldiers are saying, we're not going to serve anymore unless you force the ultra-Orthodox to be recruited as well. because this is an ethnic war, because this is about Jewish identity. So nobody's talking about recruiting the 48 Palestinians into the military. They're talking about recruiting the ultra-Orthodox. Now, I'm following very closely the newspapers of the ultra-Orthodox. They have a few newspapers, and they publish them, and I read them every day, trying to find, is there a crack? Is there any willingness, the smallest kind of willingness, by some rabbi to say, maybe we'll send some of the bad students from the yeshiva, so they will go to the army, so we get the seculars to calm down, and they will stop harassing us. No, this does not exist. They are clearly saying, we would rather die than go to serve in the Israeli military. There are many reasons for this. I don't think we have time to get into the politics and the theology, but this is a clear statement. And this is a simple fact that the Israeli public is not able to acknowledge, not able to see this. For example, there were some rabbis who said, maybe we'll just leave. We don't have to live in Palestine. We'll just go somewhere else where we don't have to serve in the military. And then Israeli newspapers were reporting, how do they think they can leave if we recruit them? Then they don't have the right to leave the country through the airport because they are candidates for the military draft. So the idea is these people will be recruited against their will, and that is somehow going to make them into soldiers that are actually going to fight for the side of Israel. This is unlikely. And Haaretz newspaper, which is supposed to be a little bit more attached to reality, but it's not, came up with this brilliant idea that all Palestinians 48 are supposed to vote for Benny Gantz, who will become the prime minister and will have enough of a majority to be able to form a coalition without the ultra-Orthodox, which would make it possible for him to force their recruitment. So the idea is that the Palestinians 48 are somehow supposed to vote for somebody who would recruit the ultra-Orthodox to kill their family members and their people in Gaza, and that's something they're supposed to want to do. So that tells you something about the reality perception of mainstream Israeli society right now.
Maybe they need to pass a law to require Yair Netanyahu to come back from Miami and go to Gaza. Maybe that would be something that Israelis
for morale,
could form a consensus around. What do you think, Nora?
That would be a step, right? Incredible. Well, we have it's so sad we have to wrap up with you today, Shir. There's so much more we always want to ask you, so we'll have you back on as soon as possible. But thank you so much for your insights. As always, you are a political economist. You're also the military embargo coordinator with the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions National Committee. Yep.
I just wanted to, again, Nora, just point people, we had that hour-long conversation with Shir about a month ago. It's on our YouTube channel. It was fascinating. We covered a lot more, but we didn't cover enough, which is why we had you back, Shir, and we're only getting started. So if you'll agree, we'd like to have you come back on again soon.
Of course.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shir.
Thanks for having me.
See you soon. And you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah. Ali, we're once again happy to be joined by award-winning British-Palestinian novelist and playwright Ahmed Masoud, joining us from the UK. Hi, Ahmed. So good to see you.
Hi, Nora. Good to see you. Hi, Ali. Good to see you.
Hi, Ahmed. Great to see you.
So, I mean, the grief is relentless and it's unending. Just a few hours ago, you posted that yesterday your step-grandmother, Yusra, passed away. You wrote that she died of a heart stroke while in a tent in Khan Yunis. The heat and lack of nutrition and medical care in Gaza killed her. The Israeli genocide kills in many ways. Of course, we want to express our deep condolences to you and your family. What are you hearing from your relatives in Khan Yunis about the situation right now?
I mean, I think this tweet really summarizes it all in terms of what they're going through at the moment. I made a mistake in the post in there. I wrote stepmother, but she's my step-grandmother. She's actually, in a way, my real grandmother, as it were, because she was the one who looked after me. I had a relationship with her, a direct relationship with her, more than my actual sort of blood grandmother, as it were. I'm feeling the kind of sense of loss at the moment and grief for a woman who's seen so much in her life, so much. One of them is obviously having her son, who was in Israeli prison for 10 years and sort of having to live through that. I was speaking to another uncle who lives now in Egypt, who also managed to evacuate in Egypt, and he was in grief and in tears to actually kind of feel that sense of loss about her, because he left Saudi, where he used to work, to go and support her, and then the war started, and then he hadn't spoken to her for about 7 months since the genocide started. I myself haven't spoken to her since they moved out of their home in Gaza and went to a tent on the beach. So yeah, it's exactly that. It's really what it says on the tin in there, in terms of, they're in the tent. It's really hot. I think your first guest, Abubaker, talked about lizards and snakes and all sorts of illnesses coming because of the heat. It's incredibly hot at the moment in Gaza, and it has been for the last few weeks. And I feel that people are not paying attention to those kind of type of sufferings and this death. I mean, for me, she was killed by the Israelis. I don't think she had a heart stroke, but in another life, in other circumstances, she would have been saved. She would have been taken to hospital. She would have received medical care. So it's one of those things where you feel, well, she is a casualty of war for sure, but the statistics don't say so.
Yeah.
Allah yarhamha, and to think of all that she lived through and all that she saw in her life, and she, like all of our elders, deserved a dignified life.
Indeed.
And we're very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Ahmed, during your previous visits with us, you talked about the really difficult and dreadful situation that your mother faced, displaced from her home like almost everyone else in Gaza. And for months, you didn't even know if she was still alive. Fortunately, she is still alive, and she was able to evacuate to Egypt with your sister a few weeks ago, and you just returned from visiting Cairo, where you saw her. Tell us, Ahmed, how is your mother doing, and what was the experience like? What is her experience like having evacuated to Egypt? And we're just so happy to see you there with her in that picture.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this picture, I think I want to print it and frame it, because this is something I never thought that I would be there. I never thought for many months that I would actually be able to see her again and hug her like that, and actually be able to connect with her. Ali, I think it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, one of the most difficult trips. And I've done a few difficult trips. I've been to Gaza, traveled to Gaza in very difficult circumstances on previous wars. I stayed on the road for 5 days, traveling from Cairo to Gaza with the kids, sleeping on the road on checkpoints, in cafes, trying to reach to my family and see my family. I went to Gaza in 2009, and I was stuck there in Gaza for about 6 months, lost my job in London and all of that. So I've done difficult trips before, and I know what they are like. But this one was probably the most difficult I've done in my life, or anybody could do. There was a woman in there who was for a long time assumed dead in my mind, because that's the best I could do to comfort myself and to really go through this emotion and to cope. For me personally, to cope is to assume the worst, that she was dead. But then she wasn't. She was alive. Then there was this massive operation. No, this step before that, even before that. Then to realize that she had lost her son, my brother, and hadn't known about it for 3 months. From January until April, hadn't known anything about it. She knew that there were some stuff happening. He might have been injured, but she didn't know that he was killed. And then there was this woman that now I know that she's alive and she's my mother. And I had to make the decision to evacuate her and to get her to Egypt. And that in itself, as you know, is a massive operation. Just this part of actually registering her name on the border, paying $10,000 to a corrupt Egyptian company in Cairo, getting the whole money in cash, in dollars, in Cairo to pay for that. Trying to sort of convince my sister to leave with her because my mother is so ill, she can't leave. And all of that, it just took so much time, so many emotions, so many disappointments and challenges. And I'm grateful for all the support that people have given, including yourself, Ali, and others, that allowed me and enabled me to do this. And somehow, miraculously, she got her name registered, and she... also thanks to the Egyptian writer Hadi Daoud, who helped us with the money transfer and all of these things. Maybe I shouldn't mention names in here, but it was such a relief moment to actually have her name registered. And then when she left, her name came on the list, and I knew that the name was on the list, but until 4 a.m., she didn't know that her name was on the list. She was still in Khan Yunis. And I had to do my best to phone and make sure that she got it, because if she missed her turn, then that's it, that she can't leave. And she left on the Saturday, and then the Israelis went into Rafah and took over the border on the Monday. So it's like one day after, that's it, everything closed, and she wouldn't have been able to leave. So that was in itself sort of an emotional journey, which, like, for me, it was so difficult, incredibly difficult to follow up and to manage operationally, I suppose, is to actually manage all the communication with the different stakeholders, getting the money, communicating with my mum, with my sister, with all the challenges that And she went out. I waited a few weeks because I wanted to, because I thought she's still very fragile. She needs to receive some medication. She needs to get some her energy back. And she did, and I went to see her a few weeks ago. And like I said, it was the most difficult thing. There was this woman who was very fragile, very emotional, very, she was like a big child, somebody who's experiencing things for the first time in her life. She has traveled. She did go to Egypt many times. She, in fact, visited me in London in 2011. So she has experience in travel. But somehow, I think she was obviously still shell-shocked. Everything around it, she heard an ambulance passing by or a police car, she would be really, really shaken and scared. And just that sort of state in betweenness, that she doesn't know where she is, in a sense. It's almost like she's in a coma. She doesn't know where she is. She's following the news closely. Her heart and her mind are there in Gaza, but not really sort of there. She's there by body. Lots of tears shed, of course, lots of emotional offloading. I've heard stories about how they evacuated from the north in Jabalia to the south and what they've experienced on the way, the shooting, the quadcopters that shot at them. I heard stories of the Israeli tanks going into Al-Mawasi area, which is supposed to be a safe zone. I heard stories of these very same tanks running over people alive and killing them alive. And I've heard stories of cousins that I didn't even know that they were killed, actually. It's a close cousin that I grew up with on the street. So very, very difficult to hear all of this and to get that emotional download from my mum. But it was very important, and I needed to do that, and she needed that. I took her to Alexandria, and that was a fun trip that I wanted her to, and I wanted to take her out and buy her some food and clothes and all of these things. And it was funny because she was like almost hesitant to eat the fish that I bought in the fish restaurant I took her, and she was like, "But your brothers and sisters are not eating this." And I was like, "Yes, I know, but you haven't eaten for a long time. You need to eat." And she just cried. She just kept breaking into tears because, like, she's feeling that pain that she's holding this fish, trying to eat like a simple fish, while her kids in Gaza can't have it, unfortunately. Yeah, and then came the time I had to leave, and I had to leave to come back to London. And she was like a little child again. She couldn't let go, and she was telling me that I lost a child before. I don't want to lose another one. And it was very strange because she knows, of course, that I'm well traveled. She knows that I'm capable and all of these things, but she was very, very clingy, very, very difficult, and very incredibly emotional. And this is sort of the emotional challenge is one thing. The other challenge is obviously the kind of legal status in Egypt, because she doesn't have a legal status there, which for my mum it might be a little bit easier because she's an older woman, but for my sister it's a lot harder, of course. And also I have friends who managed to evacuate from Gaza into Cairo. And just I want to mention this very quickly. So whoever evacuated from Gaza to Cairo or Egypt, they have no legal status whatsoever, so they're there without any visa, without any sort of legal status in the country, which means they can't get any healthcare, their kids can't go to school, their kids can go to private schools only, but even if they go to a private school and you pay high fees, their kids can't even get a certificate. So it's almost like pointless, as it were. So there are about almost 80,000 people who evacuated from Gaza to Cairo, and they're sort of stuck in that state in betweenness of nothing. Are they there? Are they here? You're not quite sure. They can't really move or do like what people do of exploring different areas in Egypt in case they're stopped by the police or checkpoints by the army and they're asked about their legal status. So it's a really, really, really awful situation for them.
That just seems impossible. And I mean, if your mom is going through so much trauma, obviously, and it must have been really unbearable for you to see her in that state and to have to leave, and especially with the very tenuous circumstances for her politically, legally. It's relentless,
and for her to have learned after so many months about the murder of your brother Khalid in January, and
that's unbearable.
Who you're still grieving for as well, and just our hearts go out to you, Ahmed, and we hope and pray that you'll be reunited with your mother soon, and that she will be able to also live a life of dignity and security. The scale of it for everyone is just overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and you're in London, and along with everything else that's going on, there are elections
tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes.
And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the significance of the elections, especially when it comes to the UK's support of this genocide against your family and your community.
Yeah, I mean, I think tomorrow is really an historic opportunity for everybody to express their kind of democracy, I suppose, if democracy really exists. I think for me, it's really simple. If your MP or member of parliament hasn't voted for a ceasefire in Gaza, then you shouldn't vote for them. End of story. Please don't put party politics before anything else. Please don't vote tactfully or all of that thing that people in the UK do, because it's simple. It's a humanitarian crisis in there. It's a political situation that we can end. We can put pressure on people and we can create change. We've been demonstrating, people have been demonstrating across the street. 1 million people at some point went out in demonstrations in London. If those 1 million people can influence just 5 other people, they can make a huge difference in terms of the political scene in the UK. And this is not just about creating a difference or a change in the political arena in the UK, but also it's about actually saying that people really care about what is happening and about, the fact that we've been demanding a ceasefire for such a long time and it hasn't happened. Neither leader of the party has agreed to it or voiced their support to it at all. And I think it's an important opportunity tomorrow to kind of use that to express your voice. And I hope that if people do and listen to this message and I think if it doesn't, I can't really stay in the UK anymore. I think, with the current policy and what they're happening, I mean, my mum was telling me about the British drones that are flying over Gaza. I mean, how does my mum know about it? Do you know what I mean? A 70-year-old woman who's telling me, your British government is sending drones over Gaza. Why are they doing that? Now the British government is blocking the ICC arrest warrant as well. I mean, why would you want to do that, and why would you want to be associated with such an awful entity and regime? Why would you want to do that? So I'm hoping that people can wake up tomorrow and send a clear message to politicians that you have to be on the right side of history, otherwise you're out. You can't be a representative of all of us.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we will absolutely be watching what happens on that front. Again, just deep condolences for your step-grandmother. We are so glad that you've been able to find the time to speak with us today. And, thank you so much for writing to keep us all, informed, and especially, the posts that you make about your family and about your neighborhood back in Gaza are so moving, and I'm always very, very appreciative and grateful for you, Ahmed.
Thank you, Nora.
And it's hard. It must be terribly difficult to air so much pain and loss in public, but the fact that you do that you tell us about your family, about your community, is a service and a reminder to all of us that Gaza is life. It's a vibrant society. It's love, and it's a great loss what has happened.
Yeah,
it is indeed.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you. We'll speak to you soon. Thanks. And you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. We are now going to bring in Jon, hi, Jon.
Hey guys, great show.
Yeah, another packed, difficult. An important show. So you're going to be talking about the ongoing battles in Shujaiya and Rafah. It's been a kind of remarkable week. So why don't you just get right to it?
Yeah, we'll just get right into it. We are going to start with the maps to give people a sense of what we're talking about. We're going to start in Rafah with the resistance report today, but you can see the map of all of Gaza here. Rafah in the far south. And then just east of Gaza City is Shujaiya, where we will be covering later on in the report. And there's still resistance along the Netzarim corridor there that you could see in red. So the Shujaiya battle space is new, but we've been following the Rafah invasion, as Ahmed said, goes back to the beginning of May, and we've been following it closely. So let's look at a map here of a zoom in where we can see the main battle spaces. So right along the border is the Philadelphia corridor. We're going to see that appear in the show again today. Tel Sultan is in the western edge of Rafah. You can see the Rafah crossing that Ahmed described that is closed here in this zoom. And also the Israeli military invaded Khan Yunis again yesterday. They gave evacuation notices to large areas of Khan Yunis, an already destroyed city where many people were taking shelter. So that's what you're seeing there on that map. And we will start in Tel Sultan with this first video is a remarkable video. 9 months in, there's still the resistance is still giving us these kind of remarkable videos. We see Qassam fighters here with eyes on Israeli military vehicles. We see a Merkava tank here flashing its lights into a building. So Qassam is in the building across the street, and we're going to watch them literally here hand dig a tunnel underneath the road outside of a house that they're positioned in. And you could see this happening over the course of a couple of days by hand. So these tunnels, this gives you a clue of what's happening as the war is going on. The tunnels are able to be built like this. This is an attack tunnel built from scratch, and literally we're watching it be built from scratch by hand by these fighters preparing a roadside bomb, an IED that's planted underneath the road to detonate underneath the Merkava tank. And this footage is just remarkable. And what we're seeing here is these are Israeli and American anti-tank mines that are used for, these are M15 mines that are usually used for against tanks. But of course, the Israelis, as we know, have been using them to blow up people's houses in a more cost-effective way than artillery shelling and F-16, F-15 bombings. And here we see a fighter who says, essentially he's saying to us, it was something that we're going to see as a theme of this show, that these are their goods being returned to sender. And we can see the commander there, again, on a closed line, able to talk between positions. And that's something that the fighters have been doing all war. So targeting that vehicle, they've got a camera right there for the target, and now we can see the blast hole from those anti-tank mines. The anti-tank mines are designed to destroy the tracks. They're called track breakers. But when Qassam stacks them into a pile like that with 9 or 10 of them piled up, it's significantly more than a track breaker. And in the Qassam field report, they said that these M15 mines were captured, not left behind. The Israelis sometimes leave them behind. Sometimes they flee their positions and leave them behind. Sometimes they don't use them all because of the resistance curtailing the area of operations for the Israeli military. So there's a number of reasons why Qassam fighters get these mines into their hands. They capture them, they're left behind. The Israelis flee and leave them and don't want to bring them back into Israel with them because it's dangerous to travel with them. If their vehicles are hit while they're traveling with these mines, it blows up their vehicle, as it does the houses that they're in, which we saw earlier in the war in Maghazi camp when Qassam fired a Yassin at a house that had these mines all in them that were being prepared to blow up a neighborhood. So you can see the way the Qassam fighters have stacked these mines, and then using the same system that they use to pull the dirt out of the ground, they use to place this mine outside the house. So the tunnel, that attack tunnel, goes from inside that house out into the street. And then the Israeli vehicle runs over. So you can see him there talking in a tunnel on a closed line. So that's something that we've seen all throughout the war and is of a major strategic advantage for Qassam, is that they have this closed line network that the Israelis have tried to get into multiple times throughout the last, the last decade, and have been unable to do that. So significant operation there in Tel Sultan. Number 2 here. Then Qassam followed that up by giving us this. This is a mixtape they put together of all their ambushes, or many or some of their ambushes throughout the war. And just for the audience, I counted the ambushes and located them all. There's 9 ambushes that you're going to see. Many people remember these ambushes from previous points in the war. They're in Tel Sultan. This is the one in Khan Yunis that we saw, the Night of Power ambush that killed 8 soldiers in a multi-staged ambush. That's Beit Hanun that we saw earlier in the war. That's also Beit Hanun, the ambush a couple of months ago where they killed 2 soldiers with 1 Al Ghul bullet. There's the Nabulsi roundabout there, and those fighters are in Shujaiya. We see Jabalia camp. And also, you see the Shujaiya operation there from December with the burning tank. So those operations, 9 ambushes that they're showing here, including captured gear. There's dog tags, and there's their Namer being towed from last week. And that's Abu Ubaidah saying, you will only find ambushes anywhere that you go in Gaza. You could check my Twitter feed for the uncensored version of that and ambush mixtape, which has excellent music. and also has many soldier drops that we edit out of these videos to keep these videos PG. So let's look at number 3 here, because this is a sniper operation, an Al Ghul sniper operation, and this is remarkable. This is on the eastern edge of Rafah, and this soldier is talking on the phone to his mother, which is just remarkable lack of discipline, total failure of leadership and command, that his commander is sitting in this house watching this guy go out on a balcony and talk to his mother on the phone. And she was quoted in Army radio saying that the call ended and she heard everything else that happened after he was sniped. The Israelis released his name, obviously, and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 also released his name. But just remarkable lack of discipline. I mean, Shir talked a little bit about the rot in the leadership of the military. That's what you're seeing here. To send somebody on a rooftop in a battle space to phone their mother on an unsecured cell phone line is just so many levels of a mistake. We're seeing it here from 2 cameras. In any case, it cost this one soldier his life, and you could see it's a pretty far shot. The distance from that camera angle is pretty clear shot. So sniper operation in eastern Rafah. Let's do number 4 here, because this is also remarkable. This was released on the weekend, on Sunday, and this is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 saying that these are them guerrilla action devices. These are the hand-delivered IEDs that we've seen them use throughout the war, that they run up and put under the tank barrel, under the tank turret, or on the back door. And you could see in the background, they're showing videos of last week's EI resistance report. Those videos were shown last week from the Al-Shabura ambush. And here we're seeing something like 6 or 7 dozen of these. And 𝐓𝐡𝐞 saying that our preparation is continuous. Let's show this one a couple times tomorrow, because it's just so remarkable. So you see the TV in the background. They're using the TV to date the video, which is something that you might have seen, in a hostage video where they hold up the newspaper to show, to prove what date it is. This is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 running footage from Al Jazeera in the background to show the date of the of that this is recent, that this is happening right now, that they're making these rounds right now. And this is, of course, 1 week after the chief of staff of the IDF said that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 was no longer functioning as a military framework, which is just absurd, because we're actually watching them function as a military framework all over the place. And we're even watching them constructing these weapons. And what we're seeing here is interesting, because these are Type 75 People's Liberation Army recoilless gun shells. And it's possible that they're just using the shell as a casing, and they're refilling them with Israeli explosives, the unexploded ordnance, that are a higher grade explosive. And so we're seeing the warheads being repurposed in this situation, which is something that's interesting. These rounds are brought in from Libya during the collapse of the Gaddafi government. Whole stores of these weapons were brought in, which is also possibly where we saw the HJ-8L, the anti-tank guided missile system that we saw for the first time last week being used. It's possible that came from Libya too. I said Syria last week, but Libya is a possibility as well. Let's show one more time, Tamara. There's because you notice all these little details in this video. First of all, there's spray paint on the wall that basically says in much more beautiful Arabic and meaningful Arabic than the English translation, but essentially says, if you think you're dismantling us, you're looking at a mirage. The closer you get to saying you're dismantling us, every corner you turn, it's just a mirage. The idea that you're defeating 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is just demonstrated in this video as absurd. They're demonstrated in all these videos that it's absurd. But this, to be manufacturing during the war, this is the first clue that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has given us that they're manufacturing throughout the war. So this is remarkable to see, and it's going to be even more remarkable to see in this next video, number 5, tomorrow. We're going to watch that one of those be used. The guy on the right here is holding what we just saw in that video from 2 days before. The guy on the left is holding the original guerrilla action device, which has a magnet and a fuse on the bottom. But the second fighter on the right-hand side, he's carrying that round that you just saw them make on Sunday, showing they released the video on Sunday showing that it was happening within the last week. But if you look at the guy on the right, he's holding that Type 75 canister. The guy on the right has it, and the guy on the left on the bottom of the screen, he's holding the original version. It's not clear what's going on with this tank, because it looks as though 𝐓𝐶 has monitored this situation, and maybe the soldiers are not inside this tank. They come at it from the side, which would allow them protection. The tank gun can't turn fast enough. Even the mounted machine gun can't turn fast enough to catch them running. But their choice of route out is interesting. One behind and one in the front, maybe suggesting that the tank is abandoned. If the tank is not abandoned, you're looking at multiple casualties here, because you can clearly see that it blasts with double. Each one of those has 60 centimeters of, can penetrate 60 centimeters of homogeneous armor. And underneath the turret is a weak spot. And in the previous video, you could see the label that 𝐓𝐶 was putting on the manufactured guerrilla action device that was saying where to target the vehicle. The back door and the turret gap are the two most important spots. And you see these fighters run up and put it right into the turret gap. And that's what causes that explosion. And inside the turret are the crew of the tank, not the infantry. The infantry is in the middle of the tank, but in the turret is the commander, the driver, the loader. So we haven't seen any casualty report from the Israelis that would match what we're seeing here, which again doesn't really tell us anything, because they've been lying throughout the war about their casualties. They often release them days later when they do release them. This is just an unbelievable operation to carry it out, to hand deliver the weapon like that, and to obviously clearly effective, and for the fighters to get away and to return to their base safely with the skills that they've learned in this battle. And this is something that's happening throughout the war. All these fighters are returning. They're returning to their base safely. These are not martyrdom missions, and the fighters return to their base as better fighters and pass on their knowledge to the rest of the units, and improve throughout the war, and will improve for the next war. And that's what we're clearly seeing here. This is just a remarkable operation. You can see, just show it one more time tomorrow, just because it's incredible. If you look in the back there, you can see the sea. So what we're looking at is we're looking at southwest Rafah. We're looking at the Philadelphia corridor, the frontier area around the Philadelphia corridor, which is the area that the Israelis are going to try to hold going forward for their plan to hold the Netzarim corridor and hold the Philadelphia corridor and use them to raid throughout the middle parts of the Gaza Strip, and to cut off the border and the arms smuggling that they believe they can cut off by digging up the tunnels. But as we know, they have only gotten to the first level of tunnels. There you can see the sea in that. Again, I don't know how many times we can run this, because it's just it's just unbelievable footage. The courage is unbelievable, obviously, but the acumen, they put it exactly where it's supposed to be put, not 2 feet off where it's supposed to be put, and then they get out of the way in separate spots. The fighters are going to pre-planned positions to escape safely. So just remarkable resistance continuing in Rafah now 2 full months into this operation. So that is the south. That is the resistance report from Rafah. And as I said, the Israelis invaded Khan Yunis. Just to cover that really quickly, Islamic Jihad fired 20 rockets at Israel from a territory that Israel said that they had cleared. And in revenge, Israel dropped leaflets, forced the population to leave, massacred people, and then are in the process of carrying out strikes in Khan Yunis in the south. So just wanted to bring note, we haven't had any videos from that yet, but the 20 rockets is more rockets than have been fired at any one time in months. And the Israelis continually say that they have stopped rocket fire from Khan Yunis, which we know is not true, because we saw rocket fire chase the Israelis out after that Night of Power ambush during Ramadan that they just showed in the mixtape. Immediately after the Israelis pulled out, they pulled out hours after they were hit by that ambush, and minutes later they were hit by rocket barrages from Khan Yunis. So it doesn't work. These check boxes that the Israelis want to show that they're achieving at least some portion of their military objectives in Gaza is just, they can't even show that. So that is the resistance in Rafah. There was more than 27 separate operations in Rafah in the last week since you last saw me. So they're able to carry on this pace now 2 months into the war. And the Israelis appear to be setting up positions along the Philadelphia corridor. Maybe I'll bring you next week some satellite footage that seems to show that they have troop concentrations right down on the water, right along the Philadelphia corridor, which are going to be targets, just like the Netzarim corridor is a target. Those positions will be a target going forward. The longer the military stays in a fixed position, the more likely the guerrilla fighters are going to operate to hit that fixed position. That is just a truism of guerrilla warfare or warfare of any kind. And as we see, these fighters are not operating as guerrillas right now. They're operating as a national army still. We're seeing the commanders issuing the orders. We saw a video today that we'll do on the show next week where they did an after action report. So they are actually telling the commander what happened in the operation, which is something that we haven't seen before. We've seen the commanders giving the operation, but all forms of the command and control are still functioning in the south, in Rafah. So let's move up to the north, because last week the Israeli military invaded Shujaiya. Shujaiya is just east of Gaza City. It is the home of the strongest Qassam Brigade's fighting formation. It is a place that has seen the history of the armed struggle has taken place in Shujaiya. If you follow the trajectory of Shujaiya, you're looking at the trajectory of the armed struggle in Gaza. And so the IDF said that they hadn't operated in the areas of Shujaiya that they are operating now. So again, we had them in December saying that they had cleared Shujaiya, which we said at the time was a joke. But now they're going back and saying that they're fighting in areas that they didn't fight before in December. So they're contradicting their own propaganda from the time. And this is something, this Shujaiya raid caught everyone by surprise. And this is part of Israel's corridor and raid strategy that is such a wild card, because they had the division, the 98th Division, that was operating in Jabalia camp a month ago. We remember the 5-week operation in Jabalia camp that nobody expected either. And so they have this 98th Division that is now moving and roving and hitting these various places with completely unexpected. So when they went into Shujaiya, they massacred a family and they dropped leaflets saying to flee Shujaiya. The UN said 80,000 people fled in the first hours, and people like literally with the clothes on their back out in the streets fleeing. But what it set up was a significant battle fighting against the strongest Qassam formation. You know, like the Jabalia formation might be like, hey, but we're talking about, you know, among the strongest Qassam formations. And as soon as they went into Shujaiya, they were hit. So let's look at number 12. And this video, you can also see this video on my Twitter. It's got an excellent soundtrack to this one. but we cut the audio to try to keep these videos online, but you could check it out on my Twitter feed if you want to see, because they're just so well put together, the media ops. We're looking at a camera here showing a command, where the camera's being positioned to show the commander who's watching the operation, commanding the operation, command and control. So even 𝐓𝐴 𝐿-Quds is flexing this constantly. They do it every week, showing their fighters planning these operations. And this is going to be another return to sender operation. This is an engineering unit of 𝐓𝐴 𝐿-Quds operating to booby trap a house and a tunnel entrance. And that, what they're showing you there, is a 2,000-pound bomb, a Mark 84 bomb, 2,000 pounds, 1,000 pounds of explosive, of high explosives that are in there. And 𝐓𝐴 𝐿-Quds has done this a number of times throughout the war, even more than Qassam has. So far rewired up these unexploded bombs and used them. Here we see he's going to lift this pillow here, and you're going to see their EFP, which is their Shawad, 𝐓𝐴 𝐿-Quds Shawad. They call it a Thunder, but you could see it's an EFP, an explosively formed penetrator. And here we're seeing Israeli mines again being used. So Israeli mines and Israeli bombs being used to prepare an ambush for the Israeli military entering Shuja'iyya. And immediately when they enter Shuja'iyya, they're hit by this operation, so using Israeli weapons against them to devastating effect. And we've seen this before. We saw it in Zaytun to devastating effect. You can see it just blows out the entire building that troop position is in. And the Israelis claimed 4 killed in the first 36 hours of the Shuja'iyya invasion. They don't say where, and they don't usually say how, and that's the case here. But we're seeing a position that 𝐓𝐴 𝐿-Quds is monitoring from a camera back to a commander, and using their engineering units to rewire these weapons. And the Mark 84 has 450 kilos of high explosives in that bomb. It's a 4-meter long bomb. Let's go to number 14 here, Tamara, because I want to. This one is remarkable too. So these are Qassam fighters here sitting on a swing. Until now, we're waiting for the enemy. The other guy says, "Blessed is Shuja'iyya for what it has spawned. We're stationed here. We have set up a tight ambush. We are the men of Commander Ahmed Jabari, and we are sitting here. Blessed is Shuja'iyya for what it has spawned." And that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the history of the armed struggle. And this is an ambush on an Israeli position in a building with a thermobaric warhead that is built by Qassam. They hit it there clearly. The Qassam thermobaric warhead is a tandem charge, which most of the RPG-7s are not. The thermobaric warhead is a single charge. And this is a distinctly Qassam weapon. The first charge punches a hole in the wall, which you literally see right there before you, punches a hole in the wall, and then the thermobaric fuel air explosion follows through the hole that's been punched in the wall. So let's watch it. Yeah, let's watch it one more time, because this is just incredible, the dialogue. We're just sitting here waiting for the enemy, they say, as they're sitting on a swing, cleaning their guns. And they talk about being men of Commander Ahmed Jabari. Ahmed Jabari is one of the, if not the most key commander in the Qassam Brigade's professionalization, creating structure, creating the military industry for weapons, creating the rocket program, just a very important Qassam leader. He was assassinated in 2012, but the fighters are here citing him because of his significant role, and he's from Shuja'iyya. So we just have another example of the fighters shouting out their leaders, and Shuja'iyya is remarkable. There was a prison break in 1986, just before the first Intifada began. Islamic Jihad fighters broke out of prison and went and fought in Shuja'iyya, and that armed battle was the precursor to the First Intifada. It was that fight in Shujaiya that led to the beginning of the First Intifada. And the armed struggle trajectory has followed that. Ahmed Masoud, who was the first Qassam fighter commander. He fought and was killed ultimately after being on the run for months, killing Israeli soldiers in Gaza and police officers in Gaza. And so he is a very symbolic figure within the Qassam movement as well that's linked to Shujaiya. And of course, Shujaiya is the place where the 2014 invasion, the ground invasion during the 2014 war, began in Shujaiya and lasted for almost literally lasted for minutes. Their first convoy of troop carriers that entered were hit in a 360-degree ambush by tunnels, by elevated fighters. 13 soldiers were killed. The Israelis believed many were captured. One was captured, and he's still held by Qassam, or his body is still held by Qassam. It's not clear if he's alive or not. So Shujaiya is just a critical spot. In the 2014 war, it was from Shujaiya that the 𝐄𝐿 outpost raid which was a tunnel operation where Qassam tunneled underneath the border, came up and hit the Israeli position at 𝐄𝐿. And the Israelis lied about that happening. And then Qassam released a video a couple of days later that showed that they had these attack tunnels going into Israel. And had, at that point, were not using them to raid settlements. They were using them to wait for soldiers. Qassam came out of one of the tunnels out from Shujaiya, and they waited all day for Israeli military targets to show up, to hit. And the military targets didn't show up. The fighters went back into the tunnel and told the story afterwards. Just remarkable fighting tradition in Shujaiya, and of course the home of our dear friend Rafat. So let's look at number 15 here, Tamara. These are 2 IEDs, and again, this is the fighters saying, for our brother commander Izzeddin al-Haddad, he is the Gaza brigade commander, and the fighters are talking about reappropriating this 1-ton missile. And they say that Izzeddin al-Haddad said that his saying is that these are their goods being returned to the sender. So you see these fighters planting this ambush for an Israeli military vehicle. You can see the Shoav EFP Type 3 there being buried. And it's going to be aimed, you can see the fighters wiring it here, and it's going to be aimed at the 2,000-pound bomb to detonate the 2,000-pound bomb. And they say, the fighters said before, I didn't catch it and didn't do it in time, but they said this is a gift from Netanyahu, a gift for Netanyahu from the lions of Shujaiya. And you can see the tanks moving in there, and that's the first tank hitting. And then this guy walks up to him and he says, "What you doing?" And he says, "I'm just waiting." He says, "Hopefully one of the military vehicles will drive by." And the other guy says, "Yeah, we'll blow it up," and that's it. It's just remarkable footage that Qassam doesn't usually show us, but the Shujaiya Brigade Battalion, they've been waiting since December for this next phase of the battle, and you can clearly see that they're ready for it. They prepared these ambushes. You can see the Merkava drive right past it. You're looking at a cameraman holding that camera. That is not positioned on the shelf of the windowsill there. That's a fighter holding that to get that shot, which is remarkable. And Izzeddin al-Haddad, the Gaza Brigade commander, it says to be continued because there's going to be a lot more fighting in Shujaiya. So we see these preparations happening despite the fact that the Israelis had said they cleared this area and didn't give any indication that they would be going back into this area. But the moment they go back, they're hit with these operations that are very significant. Let's look at number 16 here, because this is a soldier outside of a tank. This is going to be another one that you're going to have to go to my Twitter feed for to see the full video, because we had to edit out what happens. But you see a tank commander there just hanging out of his tank. Al Ghul sniper operation. On the writing, it says, "And we will remain atop the mountain of archers, and behind us the sound of the prophet repeating, 'Do not retreat, do not retreat,'" which is a Quranic verse about a battle of Uhud. And it's when their archers left their position, costing the Muslims the battle. So this is fighters in Shuja'iyya saying, we will not retreat. We will not retreat. And the Israeli military clearly not able to handle what the Qassam formation in Shuja'iyya has in store for them as the strongest fighting formation. And the Israelis seemed like they were avoiding Shuja'iyya. In all of the previous wars, Shuja'iyya was hit first. It's the closest to the border. It's where the fighters are. And so the Israelis would always hit Shuja'iyya first. In this war, they didn't do that. They went Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, and then moved along the beach, came down and attacked the Shati refugee camp and Gaza City from the south. And they cut along the Netzarim corridor and invaded Gaza City from the south, raiding north. They didn't try to push through Shuja'iyya in this battle. It's a place that haunts the Israelis. It's the place where their defeat in Shuja'iyya in 2014 led to a massacre. One of the worst massacres up till that point in Palestinian history was the response to the defeat in Shuja'iyya of the ground forces of the Israeli ground maneuver. And so this is the destruction of Israel's armored vehicles led Israel to rush into service the Namr troop carrier that is a much more protected troop carrier. And so this is just the beginning of the battle. There is 57 separate qualitative operations that took place over the last 6 days in Shuja'iyya alone. More videos were released today that show command and control. They show fighters organized, still fighting as a national army, not yet fighting as guerrillas, which would happen once the national army was dismantled, which is not happening. And it's not even close to happening. And a couple-week, 3-week, 5-week raid into Shuja'iyya is not going to change that about this situation. So, and then there's just one more I wanted to show you here, number 17. This is on the Netzarim corridor. There was more than 20 operations on the Netzarim corridor. And we're seeing here Qassam fighters with eyes on the corridor here. You can see the Israelis are driving here in Humvees and open-top Jeeps. And there's a tank there. So fighters are now right up on the edge of the Netzarim corridor. And these operations are going to intensify. You saw how fast they could dig a tunnel in Rafah. So you can get an idea of what is possible if the Israelis believe that they can stay in the center of the Gaza Strip. And then we see a soldier in a window. Again, they're still doing it. 9 months on, still doing it. There you see a traditional RPG-7 thermobaric warhead. It's a single warhead. But they don't need to punch the wall with this one because they could just blast it right through the cage, the screen on that window, and it explodes in a fuel air explosion inside that building. And the Israelis admitted 2 killed in that operation, 2 severely wounded. And what you're seeing is an Iranian RPG-7 warhead, thermobaric warhead that is, you could see, we'll watch it here. You can see the fighter is going to hold it. And you can see that it only has one charge. It doesn't have the tandem charge of the Yasin, which is the same casing as the thermobaric warhead that Qassam makes. So you'll see the fighter here just in a moment. He'll show you the head of the round, so you can see that he's using a different. So you can see it there. And again, the reason why you don't need the second charge is because watch, when you look through the window here, the soldiers are just in a window hanging a curtain, just doing their thing, seemingly not trained to do anything but massacre civilians and rob from people and destroy the schools, hospitals, the entire healthcare system, social fabric in Gaza dismantled. but they're not able to stay out of windows still 9 months on. So that's the resistance report for this week. Rafah, Shujaiya, and still operations along the Netzarim corridor happening. If not the same, then more than we've seen in previous weeks this week.
Wow. How many operations in Shujaiya?
57 in 6 days. That's like early war numbers.
Yeah.
And John, again, an extraordinary report. Thank you. But what I think we're seeing is also that the Israelis are engaged in many parts of Gaza. They're in Rafah, they're in the middle areas, they're in the north. And as the resistance has always said, the more the Israelis come into, the more troops they are, the more areas they're in, the more we hit them. And in those weeks where there were fewer operations and fewer videos for us to show us, that was when the Israelis had withdrawn most of their forces from most of the areas. So, I mean, the Israelis think they're going in to do more damage to the resistance. And what seems to be happening is that they're just giving the resistance an opportunity to do more damage to them. Is that the right reading of the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at those fighters on the swing set, just like sitting, waiting. That's the hurry up and wait of soldiers that they're familiar with. Get to your position, immediately rush, hustle to get into your position, and then you wait. And they're sitting on the swing talking about the history of Shujaiya, talking about the history of the commanders, talking about the history, of the fighters that led them, that trained them, that taught them how to fight. And are part of the Palestinian history in a way that will be recorded. And these fighters are going to go down in history, and it's remarkable. And these operations in Shujaiya, I don't know, we might have to do a bonus episode because there's so many operations and they're so capable. The operations are so detailed that they take time to explain all the things that are going on. And the same with Rafah, that to show that manufacturing video and then 36 hours to publish a video of a fighter carrying that you just saw be manufactured, because they didn't have those rounds before now. That's the first time that we saw that Type 75 round be used. The guerrilla action device that has been used for the previous 9 months looks different than that. So you can clearly tell that they are actually manufacturing weapons. They are able to continue doing that. And that was a big outstanding question that we have been hesitant to say because we weren't sure. Are the manufacturing underground? Is it continuing throughout the war? And they just showed us the answer to that and then put it into operational practice. It's just remarkable. It's remarkable what we were seeing. I even covering it every single day, all day, every day. I'm surprised every single day by what we're seeing. It's remarkable and it's heroic. And we talk a lot about the human toll of the civilians. The civilians are extremely proud of this resistance as well, and the resistances of the people as well. And they both always talk about each other in that high regard.
Yeah, especially as Shir was talking about how the Israelis are. I mean, the morale within the army is extremely low. People don't want to go back after they've met with the resistance, if they come back at all. And now Israel is scrambling to conscript the ultra-Orthodox. I mean, further disintegrating the internal society, not to mention what it means in terms of the resistance being fully capable of taking on this so-called vaunted military. And
they're just sacrificing their soldiers in order to carry out a genocide. We're just watching the darkest times, and also just the most heroic and hope-inspiring times that you can repel a genocide that's happening to your people.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that again, Jon. Ali, we had a couple of, and Asa, we had some news discussion topics that we wanted to get into, including, what Shir was talking about, the generals revolting. They're talking about being low on munitions, etc. But there's also the U.S. delusions. We had U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking at the Brookings Institute a couple of days ago. Where does the U.S. kind of fit into this dynamic? Shir was talking about how the New York Times article about Israel running low on munitions and morale, says more about the U.S. response than much else, and it's written from a U.S.-centered perspective. What can we say about?
Yeah, that's a very interesting reading from Shir, and he made some points I hadn't thought of. But I had my own reading of this article, and I think it's worth going back to and just looking at some of the elements of it. And this was published in the New York Times yesterday as we're speaking. Israeli generals low on munitions want a truce in Gaza. And it's a very long article, so I'm obviously not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the points in it. And the top line really sums it up. Israel's top generals want to begin a ceasefire in Gaza, even if it keeps Hamas in power for the time being, widening a rift between the military and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has opposed a truce that would allow Hamas to survive the war. And so you can see, again, this is the open conflict now between the military and the political echelon in Israel. And they say that this reflects a major shift in thinking over the past months as it became more clear that Mr. Netanyahu is refusing to articulate or commit to a personal plan. I think what it reflects is the reality on the ground that Jon has been showing us, that this army is having its clock cleaned, so to speak. I think that's the right term, right? I think it's a sports terminology. But they quote the Israeli military spokesperson Daniel Hagari, who said a few weeks ago, "Those who think we could make Hamas disappear are wrong. Hamas is an idea. Hamas is a political party. It is rooted in people's hearts." And then they say, we covered this in our segment with Shir Hever, but the article points out that the Israeli army is made up largely of reservists. Some are on their third tour of duty since October and struggling to balance the fighting with their professional and family commitments. And fewer reservists are reporting for duty. It hints at problems with discipline, command and control, lack of confidence in military leadership. And it says more than 300 soldiers have been killed in Gaza and more than 4,000 wounded. But regular viewers will know that those numbers are a gross. The New York Times is publishing them as if these are high numbers, but we know that the real numbers are much, much higher. But the point here, they're saying Israel is paying a very high price, even though they're not admitting to the full price. And this is very interesting. They say that at least some tanks in Gaza are not loaded with the full capacity of the shells that they usually carry, as the military tries to conserve its stocks in case a bigger war with Hezbollah does break out. 5 officials and officers confirmed that the army was running low on shells. The army also lacks spare parts for its tanks, military bulldozers, and armored vehicles, according to several of those officials. So again here, Jon has been showing us week after week, month after month, the Namer armored personnel carriers, the Merkava tanks, the Caterpillar D9 bulldozers being destroyed or damaged at least and towed out, and these have to be repaired, and they're short on spare parts. They're short on shells. Is that true? Some people have said, this is a bluff by the military. They're saying we need to preserve our shells in case a war breaks out in the north. That's kind of the thread that goes through this article, the idea that, we need to preserve our depleted and rebuild our forces for a war in the north. That's kind of their excuse. Are the shells really running out? How much of this is bluff? How much of this is designed to put pressure by the military on the political echelon, or maybe it's a pitch to the United States. This was all leaked to the New York Times. Maybe it's a pitch to Congress of the United States to say, oh, well, give us more weapons. It could be all of those things, but I think there's some reality to it because, for example, if you follow Brian Baletic and his analysis on the New Atlas, an excellent channel, which I've been following for years, you would know that U.S. and, in fact, Western production of all types of shells, particularly artillery shells, but also tank shells, is very low because they cannot keep up with the demand from Ukraine, and they have cut their manufacturing capacity back so much. And if you cast your mind back to before this genocide, the U.S. actually removed some of its strategic reserves of munitions, which it keeps in Israel, pre-positioned in Israel. It actually removed them from Israel to send them to Ukraine. So there is a shortage of 155 millimeter artillery, of tank shells, of Patriot missiles, of all sorts of air defense systems and so on. So the Israelis really are running low on weapons that they have been largely using to murder civilians, not to fight Hamas. So I think that's very significant. And it shows, again, it highlights that Israel is really facing military and strategic defeat. So that's what I want to say about that article. There's a lot more in it. I don't know if other people want to.
Yeah, can I just jump in?
Yeah.
The idea that Hamas is an idea, that this was somehow that Hagari, the spokesperson for the IDF, said, Hamas is an idea. It can't be defeated because it's an idea. Hamas is a government. Hamas is a group of people. Hamas is an army. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is an army. And it's that hasn't been defeated. It's not, they don't need to worry about an idea. They can't beat the physical fighters. They can't beat the physical army. They can't destroy the physical government. And so this idea, it implies like they already defeated all of those, but now there's some idea that they can never put away. And that's just not true. They physically have not defeated the structure of the military. And we're going to see Hamas resume as a government. We already are seeing it on the ground. They are the ones who are facilitating the aid shipments. They are the ones who are dealing with the clans. They are in control. So it's more than an idea. They're losing to the physical existence of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and Hamas.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, John. Like, I think this has become this kind of truism of a lot of politicians now, and I think, when they finally admit, when there's sort of final admittance that they can't defeat the Qassam brigades, the armed wing, and even the political wing of Hamas, I think they're sort of setting this idea thing up as the excuse for that defeat in advance, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, even look at the hospitals. They can't even defeat the hospitals. The first thing that happens when the Israelis withdraw after sacking and destroying the hospitals, the first thing that happens is the doctors go and start sweeping it up and figuring out how to put it back together. So they're not even defeating the hospitals. I mean, the schools are going to be the next thing. You're going to see makeshift schools that are set up in communities because they can't defeat the school system either. So it's not just the fighters; it's society wide, and they're committing these atrocities and still losing on every single score.
Well, those are all excellent points, and what it shows really, I mean, Daniel Hagari's statement that Hamas is an idea and it can't be defeated. Yes, it's a way of evading the reality that they can't defeat the physical presence, the fighters, the heroism and bravery of everyone who's resisting in Gaza in all the ways they're resisting. But it's also, I think, an admission that Israel has lost the battle of ideas. It's lost the battle for hearts of minds. Obviously, it's not going to win any hearts and minds among Palestinians, but I think even globally, Israel, Hamas has been so demonized for so many decades, and yet people all over the world in the global south understand Hamas to be a legitimate force of resistance, leading a just struggle for liberation against a brutal, evil, genocidal regime. And I think that understanding in my lifetime has never been more broad. But I'll tell you one place, and maybe we can switch over to Antony Blinken. One place where this is not well understood is in the State Department and in the Biden administration. And so I just wanted to point to Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, gave a speech at the Brookings Institution, as sort of an official, semi-official think tank in Washington. And he was talking about, just, I guess the headlines I'd take away from this speech, which was on July 1st, is that he continues to lie that Hamas has rejected and Israel has accepted President Biden's ceasefire proposal, when in fact the opposite is the case. And there's one particularly, both in a way ridiculous and revolting quote from Biden, from Blinken, where he talks about, Israel, everyone, the whole world has accepted it. It's just Hamas that's saying no. And he says, one individual, likely buried hundreds of feet underground in Gaza, has the decision-making power to say yes or no. And right now, in not saying yes, Mr. Sinwar, he's talking about Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza, in not saying yes, Mr. Sinwar is not only holding on to the Israeli, American, and other hostages, he's continuing to make a hostage of Palestinian children, women, and men who are caught in a horrific crossfire of Hamas's making. And this is just so repulsive on so many levels. First of all, again, it repeats the lie that Hamas has refused the ceasefire, but also it blames Palestinians, it blames Hamas for all of Israel's deliberate murder and starvation of Palestinians. And it absolves the United States and Blinken himself, who is personally culpable for these war crimes and atrocity and genocide, and tries to lay all that on the Palestinians itself. And I have no idea who Blinken is speaking to, because no one in the world will accept this except the narrow clique in the United States and the Israel lobby. There is no wide global audience for this. Not even the Europeans believe this anymore. The most sort of abject, pathetic followers of the United States would believe this kind of rhetoric anymore. But I just want to point to a couple of other things Blinken says, because he still has these delusions about a post-war situation. And he says, one way or another, when this conflict ends, it cannot and must not end with a vacuum in Gaza. It has to end in a way that makes sure there are clear, coherent, achievable plans for Gaza's governance, for its security, and of course to start to help people to rebuild their lives that have been so decimated and destroyed. He doesn't add so decimated and destroyed by the United States and Israel. And he says, we've been working over the past months with partners throughout the region to develop those plans. And as I said a couple of weeks ago when I was last in the region, a lot of that work has now turned into concrete ideas, concrete proposals. And he says, we know there are three things that are unacceptable for Gaza's future: an Israeli occupation, Hamas perpetuating its leadership, or chaos, anarchy, lawlessness, which is what we're seeing in big parts of Gaza today. And what I want to say about this is, he's still speaking as if it's Israel and the United States who get to decide. But what we've seen, what the Israeli generals are telling us, what the resistance on the ground is telling us, is it's the resistance that decides. And as Abdel Bari Atwan, the Palestinian commentator, always says, they're always talking about the day after. And he says, the day after Hamas is Hamas. The day after Hamas is Hamas. And that's what John just said, that the governance will resume. So they're still talking as if the United States has the power to assemble a group of Arab traitors and collaborators, which is what they'd be, and Palestinian traitors and collaborators and capos, which is what they'd be, to govern Gaza on behalf of the genocidal enemy. And these delusions still clearly rattling around in the head of Blinken in the State Department. But even the Israeli generals don't think that Hamas can be replaced or removed. And they're saying that we would have to accept Hamas's continued rule. They tried to soften the blow by saying at least for the time being. So you're even getting more of a reality check now from the Israeli generals than you are from the out to lunch Biden administration.
It's pretty remarkable. Yeah, I'm just so they're living in a complete fantasy world, and that will be proven over and over and over again, ad nauseum at this point. But we'll continue to see what happens. And finally, Asa, we just have a few more minutes, but you wanted to mention something. I know Ahmed Masoud was talking about the British elections. This is something that, of course, you've been covering for many, many years. And tell us a little bit about what's happening, what's coming up.
Well, we just got a short interview with George Galloway, the leader of a party called the Workers' Party. And of course, George Galloway has been a long-standing lawmaker in various different constituencies over the UK. We will be already known to many of our listeners and viewers. So let's go to that and then maybe we can explain.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Pleasure.
How's the campaign going?
Our campaign's going wonderfully. We're going to get hundreds of thousands of votes and we're going to win. I saw a poll just a minute ago which showed that 49% of the British people consider Keir Starmer untrustworthy. I'm asking why the other 51%. That was the evidence that he's an inveterate liar, deceiver, is so overwhelming. But never, and Tony Blair actually said this in the Telegraph the other day, never will a person have come to office with such a big majority, yet be so unpopular, and so bereft of a programme. So it's inevitable in those circumstances that people will be looking for an alternative. And when they get a serious alternative, chances are they take it.
I've seen projections that this election, the two main parties will garner less of the vote than the hundreds who then since World War One.
For sure.
Is there widespread discontent in the main parties?
Yes, because you're wrong to use the plural. They are one party, in fact. They are a uni party, or as I prefer to put it, two cheeks on the same backside. And everybody knows it. It's not accident that aphorism is my most famous and popular one. People regard both armies as identical, and they're right to do so. If you look at all the big issues, Ukraine, Gaza, the economy, nature, all the major economic issues, they are indistinguishable one from the other. We're to slip 6 months between them, when it's already proven in this country and in others like France that these centrist policies are actually incapable of solving the problems that people have.
So is this the beginning of a rebellion? Yeah,
I believe so. And the opinion polls are completely missing it. The fact that Farage is burning up the track is a sign that people are ready to listen to right-wing populist rhetoric. It's our task to get them to listen to left-wing populist rhetoric. That's my job. If I get into Parliament, you'll have left hooks from me, and you'll have right hooks from Farage. You won't look forward to that.
On another note, you already mentioned that Gaza and Palestine. How important of an issue is this?
Big issue, and for millions of people. Not at all of them Muslim. If you look at all the demonstrations, the protests, the majority of people there are not Muslim. All the Muslims care about Gaza, and millions of others care about Gaza. So it will take millions out of the Labour movement in the coalition that Corbyn assembled. Then there must be electoral consequences on that.
Yeah, very much for you. That's great to say to you.
Yeah, so an interview there with our colleague Omar Karmi, of course. And as Omar mentioned, there's been this projection by the Financial Times that more people than ever before in this current election, which is tomorrow, as we're live now, will vote for independent candidates. and smaller parties like his party, the Workers' Party, and the Green Party, and that is because for many reasons, as George Galloway said there, Labour and the Conservatives, very similar to, of course, the Democrats and the Republicans, are a kind of uniparty in favour of corporate interests for lots of reasons. But more now than ever before, the issue of Gaza and the Israeli genocide in Gaza has become a real wedge issue that has led people away from the main parties. And we're seeing, a lot of people have kind of learned the lessons from the Corbyn years, in the sense that, this issue, has become a real an issue that a lot of these candidates are running on, and that they are giving a very serious challenge to the Labour Party in the local constituencies on, and that is why Galloway won in his by-election, what's called a special election in the United States, in February, and we could see him. I think we probably will, not to make too many predictions, but we probably will see him return to Parliament, most likely. But the big question, I think, is if his party, the Workers' Party, can gain more seats around the country. I think it's quite possible. One of his candidates, by the way, is Jodie McIntyre in Birmingham, who is a former writer for the Electronic Intifada, who used to report for us a long time ago from the West Bank quite diligently.
Yeah, and I'll just say, George Galloway there referred to Nigel Farage, who heads a right-wing party. I think it's called the Reform Party.
Yeah.
And so again, you have these very similar to what's happening in France. They had the first round of the elections in France over the weekend, and we saw the right-wing National Rally, formerly the National Front, come first, but also saw the left, which is being falsely smeared by the New York Times and others as anti-Semitic, also do very well. I'll just say that it seems to be a foregone conclusion that the Labour Party, led by Keir Starmer, a right-wing, very pro-Israel figure in the Labour Party, is going to win. I mean, it would be a shock if they didn't. But I think the point that Galloway made is he'll be the most unpopular winner, perhaps, in UK history. And the thing to look for will be not who wins overall, because that seems to be a foregone conclusion, but where these independent parties, especially on the left, have made inroads into Labour's base, again, largely in revolt over Labour's support for this genocide. So we'll see what happens. And
a lot. And just one more thing, like a lot of these independent candidates are people like, of course, Jeremy Corbyn, who has now been, removed from the Labour Party, is running as an independent, and Liane Mohammed, a young Palestinian activist. She's a British Palestinian who is running, and there's also Andrew Feinstein, who's been a guest on our podcast before. These are all running in key seats, which are Wes Streeting, who would be Liane Mohammed's running against Wes Streeting, who's a very right-wing Labour MP, who's very pro-Israel, and Andrew Feinstein is running against Keir Starmer himself. So if he did win, that would be a spectacular upset.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that Palestine is the wedge issue. It should be dividing the left. There's the left, and if you're not with Palestine, you're not on it. And I think that has been a very defining moment.
For years, they made fake anti-Semitism the wedge issue. Fake anti-Semitism, the wedge issue. So real genocide should be the wedge issue.
That's right.
We're not 100%. We're talking about a real genocide here, not the years of lies and fabrications. As fake as the mass rape hoax was the Labour anti-Semitism hoax. And it's all for the same purpose, to serve Israel.
Yeah, and it's all becoming very, very clear. Well, Asa, I know that you'll be maybe reluctantly covering what happens in the British elections this week. And maybe just exactly. In the last few minutes we have, let's take a look at some of the incredible new features that we have right now up on the Electronic Intifada. We mentioned Abubaker Abed's piece that we published earlier today about medical students and the just unbelievable unbelievable struggles that they're having in many different ways. There's also a report about 𝐄𝐥𝐿𝐜𝐿, a feature story there at the top.
That's
There we
really
go.
an amazing piece by Osama Abu Jasser, whose family has been displaced 9 times and are now in 𝐄𝐥𝐿𝐜, and he bears witnesses to the utter horrors that they're seeing in 𝐄𝐥𝐿𝐜, which Jon talked about, of course. A really incredible piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there on the front panel is our colleague Maureen's report about the release of Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya and torture and abuse inside Israeli dungeons and concentration camps for many of Gaza's doctors, teachers, healthcare workers. And so, yeah, please do go and read that. And yeah, Ali, did you?
Yeah, just very quick. If we just, Tamara, if you just scroll down to where the features are, I'll point out a couple. There is a piece by Haneen Al-Holi who talks about how her family living in a tent in the kind of conditions that led to the death of Ahmed Masoud's mother, step-grandmother Yusra. Just the heat and the insects and the horror and just the difficulties of sanitation. Really heartbreaking piece, and how people are still finding relief by going to the sea in Gaza. And then another piece that there are 2 pieces on the front page right now, one by Ahmed Aburtema and the other by Ruwaida Amer, talking about, now it's been 9 months and nobody in Gaza has had any formal education. So the effect of this prolonged genocide on education, and that's just an aspect that has to be focused on for the long term and for rebuilding. And then right at the bottom there, next to Ruwaida's piece, there's one by Jacqueline Ashley reporting from Cairo, again talking to some of the Palestinians who managed to get out of Gaza to Cairo, the difficulties of getting out, and then the desperate situation. Yes, they do escape the genocide, but the situation in Cairo is still very difficult. So all of this original reporting, most of it from Gaza, extraordinary stuff, brought to you every day from first and foremost from our writers in Gaza, who are working in unbelievable conditions. And just also to say thank you for your support, because that's what makes all this reporting, everything we do, possible. So I just want to take the opportunity to say once again, thank you to everyone who continues to support us by sharing these pieces first and foremost, and also by making the donations that allow us to pay all of these writers and to pay all of our other costs. So thank you to everybody who continues to support us. It allows us to do this work without worrying about anything except focusing on the quality and truth of what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can find links to support the Electronic Intifada and our writers in Gaza on our homepage, electronicintifada.net, and click the Donate Now button. You can also follow the links at the bottom of this YouTube in the description. So there are many ways to support. Also, of course, if you haven't already, sign up on our email list there up at the top there. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get notified when our next podcast, a standalone podcast or live stream, is coming up. And I think that's about it. I'm actually off next week, so I'll see people in 2 weeks. And thank you all so much. Of course, Tamara Nassar behind the scenes, Ali, Asa, Jon, and everyone at the Electronic Intifada. Thanks, and see you soon.